Ogulsapar Myradowanyň hatyrasyna. 10-njy ýanlar Ogulsapar Myradowanyň dowlan gününiň 70 ýaş ýyllygy bolmaly. Türkmen rejimi Türkmenistanyň batyrgy watançysyny öldürenne bary ýogy 58 ýaşyndady. Ogulsapar uruşdan soňky ýyllarda Aşgabatda demir ýol işgäriniň köp sanly maşgalasyna dünýä indi. 2004-nji ýylda adam hukuklaryny goraýjy bolup Azatlyk radiosy bilen kem-kemden hyzmatdaşlyga başlady. Ilki bilen ýazan habarlaryny vermek bilen soňra radio ýaýlymlaryna sesli açaçan çykyş edip başlady. 2006-njy ýylyň 18-nji iýunyna Türkmenistanyň Milli Howpsuzlyk Ministrligi raýat aktivistleri Ogulsapar Myradowanyň, Dogony Sapardurdy Hajiýewy we Anna Urban Amanglyjewy tutsak etdi. 19-njy iýunyna telewizionda geçirilen hökümet ýygnagyna Milli Howpsuzlyk Ministri Gelli Muhammed Aşyr Muhammedow tutsak edilenler içallykda we ýurdun içindäki ýagdaýy durnuksuzlaşdyrmakda aýplanýar diýdi. Şeýle hem içallyk aýplamalary Fransiýanyň elçihanasynyň medeni geňeşçisi Henry Thomasyny we Ýewropanyň howpsuzlyk we hyzmatdaşlyk guramasynyň wekili Fransiýanyň raýaty Benjamin Mora garşy açaçan edildi. Milli Howpsuzlyk Ministrliginiň şeýle beýany diplomatik dawa öderetdi. Halkara tankytlaryň basyş astyna Milli Howpsuzlyk Ministrligi içallyk aýplamasyny derrew ýatyrdy we olaryň birine 3 tane beýan pöň okuny oklap, 3 tane türkmen aktivistlerini beýan ok saklamakda aýyplady. Türkmenistanyň ähli ýaşaýjylary üçin ilkinji kadrlardan bu adamlaryň boyun almalarynyň basyş astyna alnandygy aýdyndyr. Myradowanyň kaziýet işi 2006-njy ýylyň awgust aýynda ýapyk kapylaryň aňyrsynda geçirildi. Kaziýet dinlenşigine çenli hat alşmak we aklawjy bilen habarlaşmak hukuky bolmadan tutsawlykda saklandy. Batyrlygy we berk raýatlyk ýagdaý bilen tapawutlanýan Ogulsapar Türkmenistanyny ösendäp desurlaryň tersine kaziýetde günäsini boyun almakdan, prezidentiň öňünde tow etmekden ýüze gürdi we 6 ýyl azatlykdan mahrum edildi. Bir näçe günden soň 14-nji sentýabrda häkimetler tarapyndan çağalarynyň we günwatar diplomatlaryň aýtmagyna görä Myradowanyň gynamalarynyň alamatlary görülýän jesedi maşgalasyna gowşuruldy. Şol kaziýet işinde günäkärlenýänler deslapky derňe wagtyna aktivistin kemsidilenligini tasdikladylar. Halkara guramalar Myradowanyň ölüminiň ýagdaýlary barada derňe talap etdi. Ýöne derňe hiç haçan geçirilmedi. Amanglyjew bilen Hajiýewyň hersi 7 ýyl azatlykdan mahrum edildi we diňe hökümlerini dolu ýerine ýetirilenden soň boşadyldy. Türkmenistan hakda filmiň surata düşürilmegine gatnaşanlaryň hemmesi ýyzarlandy. Mysal üçin türkmen bilimindäki kynçylyklar barada gurrun beren mugallim işden aýryldy we gorkuzuldy. Myradowanyň 3 çagasy tutsak edildi we Türkmenistanyň içeri işler ministrliginiň wagtlaýyn tutsakhanasyna 2 hepde saklandy. Şeýle hem kemsidiji sorawlara sezewar edildi. Ogulsapar fransuz jurnalistleri bilen türkmen atraryň repressiýa edilen başlygy tanyşy Gelli Karizowyň akwaly barada aladalaryny paýlaşdy. Şondan soň fransuzlar bu maşgala agzalary bilen video söhbetdeşlik geçirdiler. Karizow 2007-nji ýylda boşadyldy. Soňra adam hukuklary guramalarynyň gollawy bilen Karizow maşgalasy ýurtdan çykmagy başardy. 2015-nji ýylda Birleşen Milletler Guramasynyň adam hukuklary geňeşi kararlary bilen Amanglyjewyň we Hajiýewyň beýan tutsak edilmegini we gynalmagyny ikrar etdi we 2018-nji ýylda Türkmenistan hökümetini adam hukuklary aktivisti Ogulsapar Myradowanyň gynamalaryna we ölümine jogapkar diýip ikrar etdi. Türkmen häkimetleri halkara borçnamalaryny äsgermezlik edýärler we şu wagta çenli bu kararlara täsir bildirmediler. 2007-nji ýylda jurnalist Bert Siller filmiň bir nuskasyny Ogulsaparyň erkek dogany Anna Hajiýewa berdi.
Niyazov, Supreme Commander of the Army. Niyazov, President for life since 1999. Niyazov, Secretary General of the only authorized political party. Niyazov, self-proclaimed prophet and direct descendant of Muhammad. Niyazov, omnipresent in the lives of his 5 million constituents. Niyazov, practically unknown in the West. Sapamurad Niyazov, former Communist Party apparatchik, democratically elected as head of state in 1991, has transformed Turkmenistan into one of the most closed and repressive countries in the world. Welcome to the country of Niyazov. Welcome to Ниязовленд. Turkmenistan. Former Soviet Republic in Central Asia, independent since 1991, best known on the world scene because of its immense reserves of gas and oil. Turkmenistan. Inaccessible to journalists, except for a few rare official trips, which are tightly supervised. These images are a first. I will be filming them thanks to a transit tourist visa, a hidden camera, and a small amateur camcorder. Three times a week, a ferry crosses the Caspian Sea. A 12-hour crossing between Baku and the Turkmen coast, before arriving at the port of Turkmenbashi, renamed 5 years ago to the greater glory of President Niyazov. I haven't yet set foot on land, and the crew signals me not to film. It's the start of a game of hide-and-seek which will last 5 days, in order to get the pictures you're going to see. Here I am, finally on Turkmen territory. My first meeting with Kurban, the only person willing to accompany me. The risks he's taking are enormous and he knows it. To protect him, I avoid filming his face. I don't yet know that this precaution will turn out to be useless. I don't yet know that in helping me to do my job, the worst is in wait for him. It's impossible to get around this country without permits. Thanks to his taxi driver's license, Kurban is allowed to drive foreign tourists around. My bags are regularly checked, fortunately very hastily. These pictures have of course been filmed with a hidden camera. All my movements through Turkmen territory are written down in notebooks. The authorities will later discover the precise itinerary of my trip, the hour and date of my comings and goings. Certain regions are closed, entry is forbidden. Others are less controlled. Generally, roadblocks like this are set up every 100 kilometers. There are not often arrests. It's more a way for the KGB agents and soldiers to mark their territory and frighten the people. When we forget our passes at the house, we're often forced to go back and get them. But most of the time, the soldiers make us pay a bribe before letting us go on. It's a known fact that the soldiers don't eat well, that they're starving, and that they earn their living thanks to this petty trafficking. Everyone's aware of these practices and just lives with them. No less than 7 control posts await us on our way to the capital, Ashgabat, 600 kilometers away. This monumental gate is the symbolic entrance to the city. We pass at once from poverty to opulence. We're on our way to the hotel, a brand new building constructed to Western standards to welcome the rare tourists. Kurban goes with me to check an essential detail, a daily precaution in a dictatorship, the presence of hidden mics. They can be found everywhere, but especially in hotel rooms, restaurants, and any places frequented by foreigners. The fan system is a standard hiding place. It's easy to put mics inside. There's an electric cable and a switch. But no, they haven't put anything here. It's expensive to place mics. It's not done systematically in the second-class hotels. After a careful inspection, Kurban finds nothing suspicious. Wiretapping is managed by a very efficient system put in place by a German firm, according to our sources. All the regime officials know about it and are wary of it, like Orasov when he was director of the central bank. I often attended meetings where Ниязов wasn't present. When I arrived at his house later, he would sometimes ask me, "Why did you say that at that meeting? You shouldn't have called that person all those names." How did he know what had happened without using a wiretapping system which he had had installed? He uses it all the time. My first visit with Kurban to the city centre. Ниязов has decreed that Ashgabat shall be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Marble and gold, palaces, arches and fountains. A strange mix of Greco-Roman, Ottoman and French classical styles in the middle of the desert. The city has been a huge building site for 15 years. It's being constructed at a furious pace, without the advice of anyone except the president. From one day to the next, inhabitants are expelled without notice. Here there were residential buildings which were razed to the ground. There, just at the crossroads, there was a nursery school. Last January it was torn down in less than 3 days to build administrative buildings in its place. A city built to the glory of President Ниязов. Not a square, a crossroads or a building without his portrait or a giant photograph. On every structure, in every color. The height of narcissism is reached with this unique statue of the president. The statue pivots on itself, following the movement of the sun. Now it's noon, and the sun strikes Ниязов full in the face. Ниязов is always facing the sun, as if he were the guiding star of his people. The giant French civil engineering company Bouygues takes care of every detail of all the prestigious new buildings. President Ниязов and the Bouygues company have signed more than 30 contracts since 1991, enough to establish firm ties between them, ties which have been analyzed by investigative journalist David Garcia. These are extracts from a Bouygues in-house DVD which I was able to get through my sources. These are pictures glorifying the buildings Bouygues are constructing in Turkmenistan. And here you can see the biggest mosque in Central Asia, $150 million worth. And this is Martin Bouygues, who went in person to inaugurate this great monument to the glory of Turkmenbashi, the little father of the Turkmens. And it's not just the French. All the major international groups like the Deutsche Bank, Daimler Chrysler, Boeing, Siemens, and many others are all fighting to get a part of the cake. Ниязов is one of the most courted heads of state in the world. He's also one of the 10 most corrupt, according to the NGO International Transparency. A Turkmen journalist, close to local businessmen, is familiar with his practices. Every appointment with Ниязов costs you $50,000 for a maximum of 20 minutes. When you enter his office, it's like playing the lottery. You know that you could lose everything, or you could win the big prize. That $50,000 could bring $50 million if you can get a contract signed. That's how it is for all the business done here. Ниязов is rich, very rich. Turkmenistan is the world's 4th largest producer of gas and has the world's 5th biggest reserves. 70% of the revenues go directly into Sapar Murad Niyazov's personal bank accounts. However, the president wants to appear generous in the eyes of his people. Water, electricity and gas are free. But 58% of the population live below the poverty line. And as my guide explained to me, the standard of living continues to worsen.
Yes. That way, go all this way.
Niyazov has reduced retirement benefits by between 30 and 50%. In some cases, he's completely done away with them. The result is that there are a lot of disgruntled people, and not just the elderly. Unemployment is so high, many families live on their grandparents' pensions. So without that source of revenue, it becomes very difficult to survive. It's impossible to approach the people in the market to talk about the problems of their daily life. I'm immediately stopped by a plainclothes policeman who insists on checking what's on my tape. Here, the rare tourists only have the right to photograph what the regime wants to show them. No problem if you show an interest in the greatness of President Niyazov, omnipresent, even on the bottles of vodka. Not to mention the newspaper stands. A rapid reading of the main national daily by a Turkmen dissident. This is the national newspaper. It's called Objective Turkmenistan, and it's published in Russian. Look at the astronomical number of photos of Niyazov. The first photo, the second photo, the third photo, and the stadium named after him. Niyazov, who has himself called Turkmenbashi, is everywhere. Turkmenbashi, Turkmenbashi, Turkmenbashi. Even the newspaper was founded by Turkmenbashi, and it's the main newspaper in the country. The literal meaning of Turkmenbashi is the father of all the Turkmens. Today, this constantly repeated expression infuriates Nikolai Gerasimov. Yet he invented it when he was head of the president's press service. "10 years of good and loyal service which have left their mark. I feel responsible for what's happening in Turkmenistan, and I can tell you that it weighs heavily on my conscience. I was the one who had him called Turkmenbashi, the father of all the Turkmens. It was my colleagues and myself who aided the rise of his dictatorship by creating a halo of holiness around President Niyazov. Saint Niyazov. In his megalomania, nothing will stop him. And when Bouygues' subsidiary TF1, France's most popular TV channel, is given the job of modernizing the country's television service, the instructions are clear. What Niyazov wants above all is for his people to see him even more. Of course, in Turkmenistan, there is already a totally insane personality cult. But Niyazov thought not enough was being done on television, and he asked his French friends to find some visual solutions. And one day, 2 French engineers came up with an absolutely brilliant idea. You have to admit it. Why not stick Niyazov's logo, his profile, his photo on the screen? So here you are. That's what I'm showing you on the screen here. A royal profile, encrusted permanently on the 4 national television channels. The TV news is broadcast in a loop all day long, in 4 different languages.
Monsieur Rogatine, avec ses félicitations à l'occasion de l'élection du chef d'État au poste du président du comité olympique du Turkménistan. Dans son message,
the main news stories, Niyazov, his achievements, his buildings, his work, his thoughts, and his birthdays. Not a minute passes without someone speaking about him. And for any journalists who forget, the punishment is immediate. Niyazov said one day to his associates, "They talk only of me, of me, of me. You shouldn't show so much of me in the media." The director of the national television station took him at his word and reduced his presence on the air. 7 days later, he was fired and put in prison. There you are. That tells it all. What more can you say? Nothing. Except that the number of programs devoted to Niyazov has doubled since this guy was imprisoned. My third day in Turkmenistan. We're meeting Olga, a teacher who lives in a small town in the country. After hesitating a long time, she agrees to invite us into her class for a few minutes. Good morning, children. Good morning, miss. Would you please begin by saying the Pledge of Allegiance? 5 minutes every day are devoted to the Pledge of Allegiance to Niyazov, whose portrait is in every classroom. A pledge which ends with these words. If I say the least evil against you, may my tongue dry up. If I ever betray my country Turkmenistan and my great leader, Sapamurad Turkmenbashi, may my life be reduced to ashes. Ceren is 17 years old now. She grew up with the personality cult of Niyazov from the age of 6. It was hard to continually repeat every morning, every day, the pledge, the hymn to the president, to repeat it over and over and over. I will never harm my great leader. But we had to do it, so we did. Eventually everyone loved him because there was no other choice but to love him. The best students, the most indoctrinated ones, are seated at the president's table. There's one in every classroom. This special table is covered with a rug and a portrait of Niyazov. As for the school books, they're all dedicated to the glory of the president. All our studies revolved around the president. We were taught all day long, whatever the subject was, that Niyazov was an exceptional person. Even that he was one of the 3 most important people in the world. In fact, I had the feeling that he was part of my family. I knew everything about him, his history, his family tree. He was like a father or a grandfather. The school curriculum consists of Niyazov, his family, and the greatness of the Turkmen people. If anyone knows a poem, they may recite it. All the sacrifices that we are making are useful. Thanks to our sacrifices, our soul is raised. Our president asks this of us. Let us be worthy and proud of our greatness. It was apparently the Turkmen who invented writing and the wheel. Well, that's what's being taught to the children here. 4 to 5 hours of this kind of teaching is a lot compared to the half hour devoted to the rest. Maths, languages, history, geography, literature. Today, the pillar of education rests on a single reference book, the Ruhnama. Literally, the holy book of the spirit. It seems that Allah in person dictated it to Niyazov. Whatever the case may be, this work is considered to have the same importance as the Quran. Like all teachers, Olga knows that it's too dangerous to criticize the writings of such a man in front of a camera. In the taxi which we take together before saying goodbye, everyone tries to outdo one another in loyalty. Are your children interested in the Ruhnama? Yes, they're interested in it, but they don't have any choice. Do they read it? Of course they read it. We explain it to them by drawing comparisons with daily life. It's a very well-written book. In the Ruhnama there are lots of good things. It's a very good book. Yes, there are lots of stories and legends. It is very, very interesting. And the second Ruhnama is even more interesting, because it's a book which came right from the heart of our great leader's soul. We're very proud of it. The teachers have no input regarding the content of the school program. Tajigul, an economics professor at Ashgabat University, applied the ministerial directives for 10 years. The teachers who didn't agree with the program were quite simply fired. And as there began to be less and less posts, one would just keep quiet. At the university, we were asked to teach subjects as ridiculous as, for example, the politics of the great Sapamurad Turkmenbashi. And we had to include the expression "the great" every time we mentioned his name, which meant every 2 lines of the text.
Translated into text. Now please help her.
For the professors, getting access to other sources of information to beef up their courses has become a real challenge. It's absolutely impossible to find books and information from before 1999. When I was looking for novels or historical books, for statistical data written before that date to prepare my classes, they told me at the library that there weren't any, or that they were stocked in a special place to which I didn't have access. The whole population passes through the Ruknama mill. Every citizen is supposed to have a copy. It's required. It's studied everywhere. On television, in businesses, in the army, and even at night in the heart of Ashgabat, as I was able to observe during my stay. Niyazov preaches his vision of the world through the animated pages of this giant Ruknama. And to motivate the skeptics, Niyazov promises paradise to all those who read it 3 times. Has Turkmenistan become a giant sect in the hands of its guru Niyazov? This man loves power, hates sharing it, and so he creates a vacuum around him. More than 170 ministers have been imprisoned since he took power in 1991. Not a single minister, politician, or civil servant has left his post in a normal way. 90% of us have been arrested and sent to prison, and it's increasing. There have been 5 directors of the central bank over the past 15 years. I stayed for 7 years, but none of my 4 successors remained for more than a year, and all 4 are today in prison. It's the same for the 4 presidents of the parliament. All are in prison, and 1 died there. The deputy prime ministers and ministers are practically all under lock and key, and there are really very few of us who managed to flee the country. Niyazov loves to send people from the limelight into the darkness. He's even done it live on television, where he plays the role of prosecutor, judge, and jury. This is a first for any dictatorship. This family experienced the president's displeasure and his parody of justice. These former apparatchiks want to meet me to bear witness, unmasked. They believe it's the best way to save the life of their loved one. Recent events have led me today to choose to blur their faces. Let's call this woman Natalia. Her husband, a senior civil servant, was for a long time very close to President Niyazov. It was around 1999. It was at a cabinet meeting. The president kept complimenting my husband. He never wearied of praising his work. He said to him, "You work well. I'm happy with you." In fact, the president never complained about his work. Of course, we were all very happy. Her life collapsed 4 years ago on a Saturday at 6:30 in the morning. Her husband was called to the cabinet. He went there without imagining for a single second what was waiting for him. His tie and his ring were brought to me at the end of the day. I asked them, "Have you killed him or what?" They answered, "Don't ask questions. We have nothing to tell you. Go home now. Move along. There's nothing to see." Her husband spent 15 days in the detention center, which can be seen behind this building. This is where political prisoners learn about the torture that props up the despotism. For 3 or 4 days, he refused to admit to what he hadn't done. He refused to say he'd stolen his own horses. So the Interior Minister resorted to blackmail. He told him, if you don't admit it, we're going to torture someone in your place. And then they brought in a prisoner who my husband didn't know. They stuck a needle connected to an electric cable into his genitals, and the torture session began. My husband couldn't stand to see all that blood, and he signed a false confession. 2 months later, the trial was a formality. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Since then, Natalia has done everything she can to try to get him out. He was very athletic and physically very strong before all the torture. Now he's very sick. He had a heart attack in prison, as well as a cerebral hemorrhage. He lost 30 kilos. He got seriously ill with pneumonia, and recently he's had a second heart attack. It's terrible. Nobody listens to me when I ask that he be released from prison for health reasons. Like most of the political prisoners, her husband is serving his sentence in the heart of the Karadum desert. We tried in vain to get close to the Baramali prison with Kurban and Ogulsapar, a correspondent for Radio Liberty, who collects all available information about the prisons. These are rare photos from Turkmen prisons, taken by Kurban with his cell phone. Walls, doors and buildings that look more like farm buildings than fearsome detention centers. And yet... the former officials of the regime are kept in particularly harsh conditions. They're considered dangerous terrorists and treated as such. No one has any contact with them. Their families have no news and can never visit them. Even the Red Cross or the UN or the OSCE have no access to these prisons. Timur was a lawyer for almost 30 years in Turkmenistan. He knows every one of the Turkmen prisons. His daily experience of them was often gruesome. 20% of prisoners die each year in detention. One day when I went inside the prison, the guards had not even bothered to hide the corpses. They were scattered on the ground, just next to the visitors' room. I saw them with my own eyes. They died because of the dreadful conditions in the Turkmen prisons. These prisoners disappear without leaving a trace. The victims of the regime are many, but we know the identities of only a handful of them. The prisons are full to bursting. The turnover of prisoners is impressive. More than half are pardoned every year, but the number of convictions continues to rise. In total, a third of the civil population has spent time in prison. The people who are released from prison can't get work. No one wants to hire them. In addition, most of them have contracted infectious diseases such as tuberculosis while in prison. As treatment is expensive and they can't afford it, this illness, like many others, is spreading throughout the population. Day 4 in Turkmenistan. I leave very early from Bachadok. Kurban is not traveling with me today. My new go-between wants to compartmentalize the contacts between opponents of the regime in order to avoid arrests. I'm in full agreement with this precaution. Destination unknown. After 3 hours on the road and innumerable detours, we meet our contact near a farm. Let's call her Natalia. She's a doctor in epidemiology and travels throughout Turkmen territory studying the spread of infectious diseases. The notes she takes are confidential. Speaking about them would put her at risk of imprisonment, but the situation is alarming. Natalia wants to talk about it in order to alert international opinion. Diseases unthinkable during the Soviet period, such as cholera, typhus, and the plague, have reappeared over the past few years. The main reason? Malnutrition and the abandonment of a basic sanitary policy indispensable in these regions. Contaminated animals are buried in communal graves like this one. Due to the absence of fences, other animals graze on the grass round about. In this way, more and more epidemics are caused. 69 people died of the plague recently. Through examining a dromedary they'd eaten, it was discovered how they had been contaminated. The dromedary had been bitten by a rat, and it had caught the plague virus. That's how the disease was transmitted to man. How many Turkmens have contracted these infectious diseases? In order to know more, I went to a hospital in a border town. These pictures were filmed with a hidden camera. I pretended to be ill, the best alibi I could find to enter the hospital without alerting suspicion. No one wanted to speak to me. Too dangerous, much too dangerous. Niyazov has decreed that the Turkmen population is in good health. Officially, diseases such as tuberculosis, AIDS, and the plague do not exist. The doctors have received very strict orders. They're forbidden to give the real diagnoses to their patients. Tatiana was a general practitioner at the Red Cross Hospital in Ashgabat for 20 years. She could no longer bear being forced to hide the truth and administer unsuitable treatments to her patients, if and when she could offer any treatment at all. It's impossible to tell the truth to the patients. We are wiretapped. We're under constant nitpicking controls. It was really too dangerous for me and for the senior consultant to tell the patients, here, you have this disease and you should get treatment. I was always lying to the sick. It was horrible. I remember a woman who didn't know what she was suffering from. I saw right away that it was tuberculosis, but I wasn't able to tell her. I told her that she had problems with her stomach. I had her take antibiotics, but of course they had no effect on her, and for good reason. She continued to lose weight. Her state of health grew more and more alarming, and it was terrible to see it. I was powerless, confronted by all these tragedies. Tatiana is one of the doctors of Russian origin who were victims of ethnic cleansing. 30,000 of them, like her, fled the country. It was a real brain drain. Today, Turkmen doctors are young and totally lacking in experience. There's a shortage of medicines. Incompetence reigns. We're on the way to meet a convalescing Turkmen woman. She's just been operated on abroad for a slipped disc. In Turkmenistan, no one was capable of treating her. I filmed her statement with a hidden camera, without her knowing it. The last 3 months, I couldn't even stand up. I went abroad to be examined. I was told, you have a crushed disc. We have to operate at once. The operation was a success, the pain a memory. In Turkmenistan, she risked becoming paralyzed. The Turkmen doctors only gave me painkillers, that's all. That's all. Yes, and an injection from time to time. Regarding the diagnosis, was it the same here and abroad or different? No, it was different. In Turkmenistan, the doctors never told me I had a crushed disc. I heard it over there. They just told me I had a little inflammation. Operations abroad are frequent. Clandestine networks to organize the trips are growing. Here I am at Dashoguz, in its public housing developments from the Soviet era. I have an appointment with a smuggler in an ordinary apartment on the second floor of this building. 3 candidates for departure are waiting for the right moment. They're petrified. The bribes are never a guarantee that the operation will be a success. The camera is just one thing too much for them. They kick me out right away. Many Turkmens don't get the chance to go abroad for health care. It's too expensive, or simply impossible to leave. This is Natalie's case. She tried to go to Moscow last March to have her son examined. In vain. When I arrived at the airport, I wasn't allowed to embark. I was told I didn't have the right to leave the country. Since then, my son's health has got worse. I don't know what to do to treat him. I have the impression that we're dogged with bad luck. Several months ago, Natalie discovered that her 11-year-old son Vladimir had a tumor in his groin. What exactly is wrong with him? How can he be treated? It was impossible to get any answers. Like many Turkmens, she watches powerless as her son's illness progresses. Many people are in the same situation, but no one talks about it. In Turkmenistan, the journalists never talk about the prisons full to bursting, the ravages of drugs, the record rate of unemployment, the rising mortality rates. The media, personally directed by Sapamurad Turkmenbashi, has to present an idyllic picture of the country, that of a chosen people living in a golden age. This is the president's prophecy, and it must come true. Those who don't preach the good word are immediately dismissed. I picked up the phone and I called such and such a journalist who dared to express a different point of view. He was immediately fired from the TV station. I had false accusations run up against him. I had him deprived of all his perks and of his salary. He had to be accused in front of the whole country and humiliated in front of the people. For 10 years, Nikolai believed himself untouchable. He was one of the president's protégés. Thanks to his zeal, he was even given the job of writing Sapamurad Niyazov's authorized biography in 2003. It's the story of an orphan with an exceptional destiny. His mother was a saint, his father a hero of the Second World War. But while going through the confidential archives, Nikolai discovered the astonishing truth. His mother had been a prostitute. His father, a deserter, who had surrendered to the Germans at the beginning of the fighting. I ran as fast as I could to Niyazov's home to tell him of my discoveries. I thought he would give me the post of Minister of Information, without thinking for an instant that it was going to end badly for me. Nikolai was arrested. The Secret Service tried to kill him in prison. How did I learn they wanted to kill me? From the Minister of National Security himself, who was sentenced to 32 years in prison and who ended up a year later in the same prison as me. He told me they'd planned to assassinate me by disguising the murder as suicide. They changed their minds because of my foreign contacts. Sentenced to 25 years in prison, he was freed 2 years ago as a result of international pressure. When he left prison, he weighed only 38 kilos, and he looked 60 years old instead of 47. Nikolai did his job well. Today, all the press in the country is shackled, including the very few foreign journalists allowed into Turkmenistan. This BBC reporter received an exceptional permit to go to Ashgabat 3 years ago for the celebration of the anniversary of the country's independence. The people he spoke to, a cross-section of society, all spoke in the same terms about President Niyazov.
Such a talented person.
My fifth and last day in Turkmenistan. We're driving to Izmukshir in the north of the country. A necessary itinerary because it's written in my request for a transit visa. This is a festival in the middle of the desert. I film these images with my camcorder quite openly. This time I play at being the perfect tourist. Horse races, traditional buildings, Turkmens in their Sunday best, games, laughter, songs. No one wants to answer my questions. The people here have nothing to say. My visa expires in a few hours. I absolutely must leave the country. A few last kilometers, traveling with Kurban. We will separate here at one of the many checkpoints. My fixer Kurban proposes to keep the hidden camera in order to shoot sequences we didn't have the time to film. Most of my contacts believe that my arrest was inevitable. So far, no one has succeeded in leaving the country with the kind of pictures I have filmed. A last stolen shot before crossing the border. Relief. Luck is with me. I've managed to cross the border, slipping through the net. These are the first pictures filmed with my hidden camera from the other side of the border in Uzbekistan. 2 young Uzbeks were killed a few hours ago by Turkmen soldiers. They tried to cross the border illegally. Living in Turkmenistan has become a risky activity, especially for the handful of people who work with foreign journalists. Kurban was arrested last June the 17th, as well as Ogulsapar Muradova, the journalist for Radio Liberty. Their arrests were front-page news. Here's an excerpt we were able to obtain via the internet. The camera hidden in a pair of glasses is shown on the screen. My name is quoted, my itinerary and the way in which Kurban helped me. Everything is recorded in the greatest detail.
Fransa'nın rayeti Katrina Bartleri özünün hususi avtolarına karşılar, olori Aşgabat'ın rahat mehmanxanasına yerleştiriyor. Şol yerde Nicholas Hook...
Confessions extorted from Kurban in 3 days of uninterrupted interrogations in the National Security Building, the very one I filmed with him 3 months earlier. An official of the ministry saw him at the end of the torture sessions. He was unrecognizable, according to this eyewitness account. At the same time, President Niyazov continues to say that his country is the Switzerland of Central Asia. The foreign press says that since the fall of the Soviet Union and the independence of our country, we have violated the rights of man. If you look for someone whose rights have been violated, even just one such person, you won't find him. There are legions of them abroad, like Nikolai. Close to 500,000 Turkmens of Russian origin have fled the country. What liberty? The people live in permanent fear. They're afraid they'll be taken to the basement of the National Security Service, Turkmenistan's cruelest secret service. What liberty? People no longer dare talk among themselves, but have to whisper. Niyazov is present everywhere, and not only on Earth or on our banknotes. They have debaptized the moon to give it his name as well as the planets. What's the civilized world doing to let all this happen? In Turkmenistan, we know at least 2 people who dared to do something. My guide and fixer, Kurban Amalklichev, and Ogulsapar Muradova, the journalist of Radio Liberty. No member of their families has been able to see them in prison. After a trial behind closed doors, which lasted less than 2 hours, they were sentenced last August the 25th to 7 and 6 years prison, respectively. In mid-September, Ogulsapar died in his cell, apparently as a result of violent blows to the head, the liver, and the kidneys. The 5 million Turkmens today speak with a single voice. At 66 years old and after 15 years in power, Sapamurad Niyazov has no intention of yielding any ground. The allegiance of his people must be beyond all limits, as is stated in the country's national pledge. My dear Turkmenistan, my country, may my flesh be ever faithful to you. If ever I do you the slightest harm, may my hand be cut off. If I say the least evil against you, may my tongue dry up. And if I ever betray my country Turkmenistan, and my great leader Sapar Murad Turkmenbashi, may my life be reduced to ashes. The final word from the country of Niyazov, the leader of all the Turkmens.